In this class, we're going to talk about the Chaturthamsa Varga, or the fourth Varga. This is pretty much the most neglected Varga in all the old books. Vargas 27, Vargas 40 and 45th are neglected. So really are 16, 20, and 24 in the classical text. But from the first group of 12, the Vargas between number 1 and 12, all of them have usually some mention in some book somewhere. The Chaturthamsa is pretty much completely ignored. It's just, there's nothing on it at all. And this is really surprising because you're going to find it's a really critical Varga. Okay? It's as important as the Hora, it's as important as the Drekana, but it's just neglected. We saw how the Hora and Drekana, we had images of the Horas and Drekanas, we had results of Drekanas and Horas in the rising sign from more than one text. But in the Chaturthamsa, those books, they just skip over the Chaturthamsa, and then they will give stuff on Septamsa though. So they give lots on Drekana, skip the fourth Varga, and then give a lot on the seventh or Septamsa, and they totally skip this Varga in between. It's really a neglected Varga. But you're going to see it's really an important Varga. Okay? Now, Parashar says that the Chaturthamsa is for Bhagya. And Brihat Parashar is the only text that mentions this Varga at all. Okay? It says it gives Bhagya. Now, Bhagya literally means a portion or a share. So if I've got a jar of candy, and I'd say there's 200 pieces in there, and I've got 20 people to share the candy with, I'm going to part out that candy. Maybe I'll give each person 10 pieces, or maybe I'll give one person 20, and another person 1, another person 17, whatever. But whatever each person gets, however much candy each person gets out of that jar, that's their share, or bhagya, that's their portion. And the share you get in life, the portion you get in life, it has to do with your destiny, how much you're meant to have. So bhagya does have connotations of destiny, meaning this is your share in life, this is what you're destined to have. Now, as your share, it means something you're getting, okay? And, it's something desirable that you're getting. Bhagya is never undesirable share, okay? It's always something desirable you're getting. So it has to do with our fortune, okay? So the Chaturthamsa has to do with the fortune that we're meant to have. Now the question is, what is fortune? And lots of people will define that word in different ways. But in astrology, we've only got one definition. And that's the definition that we look at when we look at the Chaturthamsa. And we'll get to what that definition is in a moment, okay? Now, to calculate the Chaturthamsa, first of all, is real simple. Each sign is simply divided into 4 parts. Let's take Aries, divided into 4 parts. The first part of the sign is ruled by the sign itself. So that's the first 7.5 degrees. So each part is 7.5 degrees. The first sign is ruled by the sign itself. The second Chaturthamsa is ruled by the fourth from that sign. So the second Chaturthamsa of Aries ruled by the fourth from there, Cancer. The third sign, or the third Chaturthamsa, is ruled by the seventh from there. So the third Chaturthamsa of Aries is Libra. Okay? Put the symbols in here to make it a little easier. Then the fourth part of the Chaturthamsa, the fourth Chaturthamsa of a sign, is ruled by the 10th from there, which is Capricorn. And of course this first part is Aries. So that's all it is. The first one is ruled by the sign itself, the second one by the fourth from that sign, the third one by the seventh from that sign, and the fourth one from the 10th. So Gemini, first Septamsa, or first Chaturthamsa is Gemini, second is Sag, the third is, what am I doing here? Let me start over. The first is Gemini, the second is Virgo, the third is Sag, and the fourth is Pisces. Okay? Pretty simple. It's an easy one to calculate. And since each part is just 7.5 degrees, it's something you can easily calculate right in your brain just by looking at the degree in the chart. Okay? Now, the the deities, and this is all the information we get on the Chaturthamsa, is just two things. The Chaturthamsa is for Varga, fortune, and the Chaturthamsa deities. And there's nothing else that I've ever seen on the Chaturthamsa. That's it. So, the first Chaturthamsa, first 1/4 of a sign, is ruled by Sanaka. The second is ruled by Sananda. The third by Sanat Kumara. The fourth by Sanatana. Okay, so these four beings are rishis, and they're called as a group the Sanat Kumaras. Because why are they called that as a group? Because they're children. They're 6 years old. And the story of them is, after Brahma was born, the first thing Brahma needed, he needed help creating creation. He needed help creating offspring. Okay? So the first thing he did, he created these four rishis. These four rishis were born. These Sanat Kumaras. And Brahma told him, he said, I need you guys to, populate the world and, help me with creation. And these four rishis said, no way, we're not going to get involved in that at all. We're not going to progenate for you. We're not going to deal with that. Okay? And they went on to be in their eternal bliss. But they're the first created, manifested thing. They're the first creation that was a tangible, in any sense, creation. Okay? Created by Brahma. The first thing Brahma did was create the Sanat Kumaras, and they rebelled against their dad. Okay? They're the original rebels. And because of their desire to maintain innocence and the joy of youth, they never matured or aged beyond the age of 6. So if you see them, they look like 6-year-old kids. There's actually a funny story about, an interesting story about these Sanat Kumaras. So one time they wanted to visit Vishnu. So they go to Vishnu's place, and the wardens of Vishnu's door, the people that stand outside his throne room, the 2 guards out there, wouldn't let them in. They just figured they're the Sanat Kumaras, they're like these divine rishis, so pure, they can go anywhere they want. And they went to go in, and the guards stopped them. And so they got really upset at the guard for, being stopped and being treated like just 6-year-old boys, which is what they looked like. So they cursed these 2 guards that they would have to go live their lives out on earth. And then upon uttering the curse, the guards realized that these were rishis and who they were. So they felt really bad, and they groveled and fell on their knees and asked for forgiveness. And then Vishnu heard the commotion, and so he comes out and sees what's going on. And the Sanat Kumaras, these 4 little rishis, felt bad about having cursed these guys, but a rishi's word is like gold. Once something's said, there's no changing it. Okay? So they just can't erase their curse, even though they would have sort of liked to. So, and even Vishnu, who wanted to help out his loyal and devoted, guards, couldn't remove the curse, but he could modify it. So he asked the 2 guys, he said, well, I can modify the curse that you can either have 7 lifetimes on earth, living as noble people who love and adore me, or you can have 3 lifetimes on earth as the most evil villains of all time. And so they said, we'll take the 3 lifetimes as evil villains. And Vishnu said, and I promise you that on each of those lifetimes, I'll be the one who kills you, which is a blessing to get killed by Vishnu. So these 2 gatekeepers, descended onto earth and had 3 incarnations. And these incarnations are the 2 famous evil pair that are always fought by some incarnation of Vishnu. In Graha Sutras, if you read about the different avatars of Vishnu, we see these 2 come up all the time. One of them was killed by Narasimha. One of them was killed by Varaha avatar. 2 were killed by Rama. And 2 were killed by Krishna. And the most famous pair are the 2 killed by Lord Rama, and that is Ravana and his brother Kumbhakarna. Those were these two gatekeepers who were, had this curse to be the most evil beings on earth. Okay? So when we see that Ravana was not really evil. He just had to play this role of a totally evil being, and he figured he'd rather be hated and, do evil and be back with Vishnu in just 3 lifetimes than to be noble and good and have to be down on earth 7 lifetimes away from Vishnu. So it just shows, this myth also shows that a true devotee will do whatever it is to be close to God, even if that, with being that, creates misery in every other aspect of their lives. Okay? So anyway, that's some of the myths of these little rishis. There's not a whole lot on the mythology of these rishis. They're really adored. The question is, what do these rishis really represent? And that's really the key to understanding this Varga, because there is no information on Chaturthamsa Varga other than the deities. We have nothing else to go on. Okay, we don't have interpretations like some of the other Vargas. We've got nothing to go on. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, these first 4 rishis were supposed to go out there and create progeny, but they didn't. So then Brahma created 7 rishis. And those 7 rishis are the progenitors of all of mankind. Okay? Interesting enough, the chart that we use for, progeny, for creating offspring, is the 7th Varga, the Chaturthamsa. And it just happens to be 7 rishis from which all mankind has been born. So anyway, we'll talk about that more in the other Varga, in the next Varga, the Chaturthamsa. So these 4 guys decided not to do that. Now, in the Bhagavad Gita, there is a line on these Sanat Kumaras. Krishna says, the 7 great rishis, which were the 7 progenitors of mankind, the primeval 4, which are these 4 Sanat Kumaras, and the Manus are also modifications of my nature, born of my thought and endowed with creative powers like mine. From these progenitors come all living beings on earth. So he's saying the 7 rishis, the primeval 4, and the Manus are, modifications of his nature, which means they are aspects of Vishnu or of Krishna. Okay? Now, Paramahansa Yogananda has an interesting interpretation of this sutra. He says, the primeval 4 mind-born sons of Brahma, the creator, are Sanaka, Sanatana, Sanatkumara, and Sanadana. Okay, or he says Sanaka, Sanadana, Sanatana, and Sanatkumara. So the primeval 4 mind-borns are these 4 guys. Okay? Symbolically, they are the firstborn differentiation of spirit from which creation evolves. They are the pure creative nature of God, Mahaprakriti, or Holy Ghost. As the very names imply, they are the Lord's eternal, Sanatana, everlasting, consciousness of bliss, Sanadana, which means having joy, that exists from the beginning, Sanaka, former Asian, and is ever new, or Sanatkumar, ever youth. These sons of Brahma remain pure, innocent youths, declining to create progeny. Yet all things evolve from this bliss. For inherent in Mahaprakriti, along with the Lord's eternal joy, are the 3 gunas or attributes of creation, sattva, rajas, and tamas. These qualities are equivalated in a quiescent state in the Mahaprakriti. But when rajas, the activating attribute as Brahma, the creator's route, enlivens also sattva, the nourishing quality, who is Vishnu, the preserver, and tamas, the degenerative quality, who is Shiva, the destroyer, dissolution, the inevitability of all things in the realm of change and illusion. The will of God to enjoy his bliss through many forms sends forth his Ananda as 4 fundamental creative ideas impinge on these 3 gunas. And that's Om, vibration, Kala, time, the idea of change, Desha, space, the idea of division of the one internal being, and Anu, Atom, the idea of particles of the manifestation of form. So, what he's saying there is that these 4 Sanat Kumaras, these 4 Deva Rishis, or these 4 Rishis here, these are, these firstborn Rishis, they represent God's inherent bliss. Okay? And that bliss is, as he says here, eternal, conscious of bliss that exists from the beginning and is ever new. So eternal is Sanatana. Conscious of bliss is Sanadana. That which exists from the beginning is Sanaka. And ever new is Sanatkumara. So that bliss, that one divine bliss, which we never tire of, unlike everything else in the world, is symbolized by these Sanatkumara rishis. Okay? And out of desire to share that bliss, or to express that bliss, creation is created. Okay? Through the three gunas and so on and so on. Okay? So the important thing is that these represent that bliss of God. And the bliss of God is unique to any other type of happiness or bliss because it's there from the beginning. It's ever new. It never gets boring. It brings joy, and it lasts forever. Things in the world can have relatively one of those qualities, but nothing has all those qualities. That's why everything in the world we eventually become bored with or unsatisfied with. The only thing that gives satisfaction forever is the God's bliss, which is symbolized by these four Sanatkumaras. So why are we using these, blissful rishis as deities of the fourth Varga? Because remember, the fourth Varga falls between Vargas 1 and 12. And Vargas 1 through 12 have to do with concrete manifestations of things that we have in our life. Okay? Why? Well, because it's these qualities that symbolize fortune. We're fortunate with something because we have it, we've always had it, and we always will have it. Okay? Which is Sanaka. Okay? Something that exists from the beginning. We're fortunate if we have something that we always have, right? We're fortunate when something gives happiness. The second Chaturthamsa, Sanadana, is having joy. We're fortunate with something because it makes us happy, right? The third is the Sanatkumara, is ever youth, ever new. We're fortunate with something if it always is new, if it's always interesting, if it never gets boring, right? We're fortunate with something if it's Sanatana, which is everlasting, if it's something we're always going to have. Okay? Those are the things that are fortunate. Now, interesting enough, astrology happens to be that, right? Astrology exists from the beginning. From the beginning of creation, astrology's been here. It's always going to operate. It's never going to end. Okay? Astrology, having joy, giving bliss. Yes, astrology can give a lot of happiness. Why? Because when you study something, it stimulates the hormones in your brain that make you happy. And since astrology is ever new as well, which is the third Chaturthamsa, Sanatkumara, there's always something new with astrology. You'll never be bored. I remember everything I studied before astrology, after a year or two, I got bored with it. I just really perceived the limitations of that thing, and I got bored. And with astrology, I haven't gotten bored yet. There's always something new with astrology. And then the fourth Chaturthamsa is Sanatkumara. That quality astrology also has, which is everlasting. Astrology is always going to exist. It's always going to matter. So just by us being able to study astrology, we're fortunate. Okay? The other thing that, on a worldly sense, the most fortunate thing in the world is real estate, land. The land also has these qualities in a material sense. Materially speaking, or earthly wise, the land has existed from the beginning, relatively, right? Not in the greater cosmos of everything of the universe, but in respect to life on earth, land exists from the beginning. It has the quality of Sanaka. It gives you happiness to have land, right? Look, wars are fought over land. Everyone had their territory. People find happiness on land. It's essential. It's ever new. You can always do something new with land. It's constantly changing. Okay, it's eroding, it's growing, things are dying. It's always new, and you can always think of something new to do with a piece of land. And then relatively speaking, land is also sanatana, which means it lasts forever. The land you own is going to last way longer than you are, right? So real estate or land is the one thing that, from a material point of view, fulfills the consideration of what makes something fortunate on all four levels. And because of that, the most important indication as far as a specific thing in the Chaturthamsa is real estate. It's the Varga we have to look at for real estate. And that may be why this Varga is largely ignored in Hindu astrology. Because it represents fortune and real estate. And those are things that astrologers, the little village astrologer, which all Vedic astrology originates from, because that's all there used to be in India, relatively speaking, small places. You were largely stuck with the fortune you were born into. So why bother looking at your fortune? Pretty much we know your fortune is going to be the same as your family's, in most cases. Also, where you live, the real estate you have you're going to live with your family. If you get married, if you're a woman, you're going to go live with your groom's family. So, fortune and real estate, or where you're going to live, your house, were very, very, very limited options in traditional India. And I think that's why the fourth Varga has been largely ignored. And also, moving is completely ignored in the Vedic astrology text. There might be yogas that say you have to suffer living in a foreign country as a curse. Like, it's a bad yoga that says you'll dwell in a foreign country, which is just terrible to have to go live in a heathen country. But they never have yogas that says you're going to live all over India, or you're going to move all over the place. They don't have those kind of yogas. Relocation astrology has been largely ignored in Vedic astrology. The only text that deals with where the effects of where you might live is there's a little bit in Muhurta Chintamani, which I've covered in the Kakini class on this website. Okay? So, whereas in the West, relocation is a huge thing. There's some astrologers that only do relocation. Figuring out the effects of you living here or here. And of course, in the U.S., your fortune is completely dependent upon you. It has nothing to do with your family, right? Your brother might be stuck over here starving, and you're making $1 million an hour. So in the Western culture and in India too now, in modern culture, let's say, fortune is huge. Even 1,000 years ago in Western culture, we wouldn't need to look at the fourth Varga hardly ever, because again, you would be stuck with your family's fortune. And you'd be stuck living on your family's land if you had any, or being a serf on the same land that your father was a serf in. Unless you were a woman, in which case you go live with your husband and have his family's fortune. So it's really a very important Varga for the modern world, however, where we're constantly moving from place to place, where people regularly purchase more than one real estate property in their lifetimes, and where people are striving to make their fortune. Okay? Now, so the Chaturthamsa gives fortune for things based upon whether the planet falls in one of these Chaturthamsas. If the planet falls in the first Chaturthamsa, then Sanaka is its lord. And that means that things represented by that planet will tend to be things or qualities that the person's always had. Exists from the beginning, right? Things that they can count on and depend on because they've always had them, sort of. If a planet falls in the second, then it's Sanadana. They're fortunate with that thing because it really makes them happy. If it falls in the third Chaturthamsa, they're fortunate with that thing because it's ever new, it's always interesting, it's always changing, it never gets boring. Also, I find people who've got planets in this third Chaturthamsa, the ever new Chaturthamsa, that they more easily move on to new things after old things have decayed. So let's say you have someone whose Venus is in Sanat Kumara, Chaturthamsa, and they get divorced. Well, they have a lot easier time just going out and getting married again. Okay, so any planet that's in Sanat Kumara, Chaturthamsa represents things we can easily jump into something new with or find something new. So even when one thing ends, we're much more ready and able to find something new, whatever it is that we like just as much. And whatever it is, say you love your house and you're forced to move, and your Mars, which represents properties in Sunat Kumara, you easily are able to find a house you're just as happy with. Okay? But, so that's kind of interesting about that Varga, or Chaturthamsa. If the planet falls in the last Chaturthamsa and it's in the Sanatana, then that's something that once you get it, you can really count on, depend on it, on having it for a very long time. It's a lasting thing. Okay? So anything that meets one of these qualities is something that we're fortunate to have. We're fortunate to have anything that we've had from the beginning, anything that gives happiness, anything that is always interesting and renewing itself, anything that is lasts forever. And this is, again, relatively speaking. Okay? That makes that thing fortunate. Okay? Or we could say that makes it real, and that's why we call it real estate. Now, the Chaturthamsa and the Hora are very linked Vargas in a way. They're linked, obviously, because the Hora is Vargas number 2, Chaturthamsa is Varga number 4. Squaring 2 gives 4. So that means we get the results of the Chaturthamsa, which is fortune, via taking care of our second Varga indications, which are our responsibilities. If we fulfill our responsibilities successfully, we always result in greater fortune. It's just a natural thing, right? If you maintain all your finances well through your Hora, it's just a matter of time before you get real estate and property, right? Okay? So these are linked. Now there's some really big differences though. The Hora has to do with accomplishment. It has to do with accomplishing what you have to do. Okay? So the Hora represents the accomplishing what we need to do to maintain our responsibilities. And we'll get wealth and finances to do that. But the Chaturthamsa is fortune. It's what makes us happy that we have something precious in life, that makes life worth living, okay? That gives us a sense of security that's always there. That makes us feel like we're lucky in the world. That life just isn't a total struggle of trying to survive and fulfill our bills and responsibilities. Okay? And how I like to say it, the Hora gives us the satisfaction, if it's good, of fulfilling our responsibilities. Alright, I'm satisfied. I did a good job. But the Chaturthamsa is what makes us feel lucky with our life. Feel fortunate. Yeah, I actually have all this too. We don't just fulfill our responsibilities, but we're also lucky to have something that's really worth having. And those things are indicated by this Chaturthamsa. Okay? Most important bhavas in the Chaturthamsa. Fourth bhava, obviously, right? Most important, first of all, Alright. Alright, so a review. The Chaturthamsa reveals that for something to be truly fortunate, it must be either existing from the beginning, something that we've always had and always will have. It must give great happiness. It always has to have something new to offer. And once it's established, it has to last. Okay? Those are the fortunate things. Grahas falling in the first Chaturthamsa indicate those things that a person has always had as part of their life in their earliest memories. This Chaturthamsa is the same Rashi as the Rashi in question. It is the first from that Rashi. It's something that's innate to who you are and how you go about things. Okay, now obviously, when you're born, you're not born married. So if you have Venus in your first Chaturthamsa, it doesn't mean like right away you're going to be born married or anything like that. Obviously not. It just means that you get Venetian things in your life that prepare you for better marriage later in life. But you're born with those qualities and the things that support those qualities. Okay? Graha is falling in this, but the point I'm making is that first Chaturthamsa is the same as the sign itself. So the first house, first sign is what you're born with, is what's just innately there. Graha is falling in the second Chaturthamsa. I'll cut this up again. So falling in the second Chaturthamsa indicate those things that can give the greatest joy. This Chaturthamsa is the fourth from the Rashi in question. So second Chaturthamsa is the fourth Rashi, which is the Rashi of happiness, right? So it makes sense that that's the Chaturthamsa that gives joy. Graha is falling in the third Chaturthamsa, indicate those things that always have something new to offer. This Chaturthamsa is the seventh Rashi from the Rashi in question. So the seventh sign has to do with relationships, and that's why we want relationships in people, right? Because it brings something new into our life, a new element, so that we're not bored, right? We get bored with our own lives, so we want to share somebody else's life. So the desire to always have something new is same as that desire for relationships. Okay? Graha is falling in the fourth Chaturthamsa lasts forever, even after periods of terminations and endings. Something lasts, and that something is what we are meant to take on to the next step of our lives, and that which is indicated by Grahas in the fourth. So this is an important point of this fourth Chaturthamsa. It represents, it's the end of the sign, and the end of a sign we know is sort of the transitionary end, right? The Drakana of, if we put a planet in the fourth Chaturthamsa, it's going to be in the Durvasa, Drakana, right? The destructive Drakana that wants to terminate things and end things and transition things. But out of every ending transition, there's something we keep with us, some part that we're able to keep. That's the fortunate part. And that fortunate part is represented by this fourth Drakana, or Chaturthamsa, okay, which is the 10th sign from the first. Now, the interesting thing is, number 10 equals number 1, right? 1 plus 0 is 1. Number 1 equals number 1. The first Chaturthamsa is what a person's always had. It's, as they call it, exists from the beginning. The fourth Chaturthamsa is everlasting or eternal. Those are the same, right? The first and fourth Chaturthamsas are sort of the same thing. And there's a rule in Hinduism and in philosophy that the only thing that's real is the beginning and the end, and that they're always the same. So the beginning, the first, and the fourth are the same. The difference is, number 10 is the first on another level of existence. So it represents the transition and what's kept, what's lasting after the transitions of life. So while this planet that's in the fourth Chaturthamsa will be in a Durvasa Drakana and therefore have some big transitions to it, there'll always be something left, something that we get to take with us onto that next level, which means something that actually does last where everything else is falling apart. And that's indicated by the planets in this fourth Chaturthamsa. Okay? And that's all that is given in the ancient texts on the Chaturthamsa. Just these four deities and how to calculate them, and other than that, they're ignored. But I'm sure you can see that these Vargas have this Varga has a lot of important potential. And just mathematically, it's really an important Varga because in Hinduism, the key numbers are 3 and 4. In Hindu philosophy, 3 and 4 are key numbers. Jaimini, in fact, really emphasizes the number 4 in his sutras as a conceptual number. Different cultures had different numbers that they used to conceive the meaning and order of their universe. The Mayans, for instance, used the number 5. And so in Mayan numbers, number 5 was a bar, and single digits were just circles. So that would be 8. This would be 9, and 2 lines would be 10. Everything was based on the number 5. The idea that in 2012, in a few months, is the end of the Mayan calendar, well, that means it's an end of 1/5 of the Mayans' measurement of precession. So they took the precessional cycle of 25,600 years, and divided it into 5 parts. Well, something like that, 5 parts. Because that's how they did it. They used 5 as a foundation number. In Hinduism, we actually see a lot of numbers. We see 2, 3, and 4. Always. Jaimini really emphasizes 4. In fact, Jaimini Sutras is 4 chapters, and each chapter is broken into 4 parts. There's absolutely no reason for doing that. You know, he could just have written chapter 1 through 16 like other authors, or have more chapters, but he did that for a reason. He did that because he wants us to remember that he's emphasizing that number 4, and knowing that actually helps us understand some of the sutras correctly. Whereas if we didn't know that, we would understand the sutras wrong. So Jaimini never does anything by mistake. But the point I'm making is that the number 4 is an important number in Hindu philosophy and in occult philosophy in general. And so the Chaturthamsa, the 4th Varga, is obviously going to be a very, very important Varga that we can't afford to ignore. Okay? So we'll get more into that Varga, and you will see how interesting it gets. And after we finish this Chaturthamsa Varga, we're going to do a review of Vargas 1, 2, 3, and 4, which sort of are a mini group of their own before getting into the other Vargas.